a lot of people are now thinking, if I want to have a future in the Republican Party, if I myself want to be president one day, I've got to be on this side. And it's kind of scary because it's the way that self-interest snowballs in politics.
Hello, I'm Hugo Rifkind, and now we're going to be unpacking the politics of the day and the stuff that's even more important than politics too. And joining me are two of my favourite bobos. We'll explain what that means later. Times columnist James Marriott. Hello, James.
Hello.
Hello. And Katy Balls, who will soon be joining the Times as Washington editor and columnist in April. Hello, Katy.
Hello.
Thanks very much for being with us, and welcome to the building. I know you've been in the building before, but welcome.
But now I feel more welcome.
Yeah, you're even more welcome than you were previously. James, you're always welcome.
Thank you. You make me feel welcome.
In a way. We'll get to Bobos shortly, but first, Donald Trump met with Emmanuel Macron overnight. Despite Trump's antipathy towards Europe right now, the pair seem to get on extremely well. There were handshakes, knee-slapping, jokes, and so on. But there were also some serious disagreements, including on Russia and Ukraine.
Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total efforts, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money, to be clear.
James, they were extremely physical. Physical, like in the past, Trump was only reportedly physical with, well, other people. How can Keir Starmer compete with this? How can he up the stakes? What do you see coming? Sort of spooning?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the only way, doesn't it? I think he basically can't compete with this. Macron is so good at Trump because he is, do you think, almost as big an egotist?
Right.
Potentially equal to him. And I think it's that sort of, when you are confronted with a huge narcissist, which I think we can say Trump is, someone with a similar ego who's prepared to just go in and unashamedly tackle Trump, man to man, is easy with him because Macron thinks that he himself is a genius and isn't nervous. And I'm really dreading watching the equivalent thing play out with Keir Starmer, who I do not think will be, seizing Trump's arm and correcting him as he rambles on. And yeah, it's pretty, Macron's annoying in some ways. He's pretty cool at times, and that was quite a nice moment from him.
I remember last time the handshakes that went on for like sort of minutes because neither of them could bear to be the first one to let go, and the squeezing of knuckles you could hear. And you're right, if Keir Starmer tries to do the same thing, it will just be very sort of excruciating.
He'll try and grab his arm and kind of miss and end up sort of hitting his face or something terrible. It's going to be a socially awkward nightmare.
Cringing thinking about it. Katy, you're off to Washington in April for us. Starmer's off to Washington on Wednesday after PMQs. What should we expect from that trip, do you think?
Well, I think we just had a good preview, which is probably a really awkward press conference.
With grappling.
Yeah. You also have the actual meeting, of course, but I think if we think about the past two UK prime ministers who, had Donald Trump as their president the first time around, there were some pretty awkward press conferences over that period. And Theresa May, of course, she had the hand-holding when she visited the White House, but she also did have to stand next to Donald Trump as he effectively blasted her Brexit policy. And praised Boris Johnson before Boris Johnson had taken over. And obviously the dilemma for the UK leader is, do you stay polite and just kind of smile awkwardly? I agree with James. I don't think Keir Starmer would quite have the confidence to think he could interrupt and make a bit of a joke or even correct Donald Trump on anything, because he's seeming to so far in all his language be much more deferential to the Donald, which then obviously aggravates part of your base back home who's thinking, why are you doing to this man, given all the things he has said that go against the Labour Party?
Well, that's the thing. It's not just theatre. It's not just performance. You could almost say last time around, in Trump's last term, a lot of the time it was just performance, because while there may have been sort of, disputes with Trump over policy and ideological difference between Trump and Europe, it wasn't existential like it is now. You have somebody who's really ostensibly posing the greatest military threat to Europe in multiple generations, and they've got to go and play nice with him. Katy, do you think does it look pretty craven? Or
well, I think there are obviously different ways of looking at it. The question is, what is the most effective way to influence Donald Trump? Now, the problem is no one has the answer to that. Everyone is trying to work out if Donald Trump is playing a fantastic game of 5D chess that not everyone has just clocked onto by putting Zelensky a bit down in public and getting Putin on side, which is what I think some who want to be supportive of Donald Trump are telling themselves. Or is it the case that we hear reports that, the White House and some figures are just as surprised as anyone when Donald Trump says or does something, and this could all be rather messy? And I think only time is going to tell.
Yeah, James, I sort of watching all the sort of stuff come in last night about the various UN votes and the position of America being on the side of Russia with the support of Belarus and North Korea and Iran and other such nations. It's sort of, it's horrifying, isn't it? Horrifying.
Yeah, I'm horrified. I mean, there is a sort of maybe 5% of my brain that is wondering if what Katy says is true, and actually there's going to be some magnificent deal at the end of it. I mean, there's sort of part of me clinging on to this, but yeah, it's just unlike anything that would have been imaginable. I think even in Trump's first term, it really does feel. Everyone who's saying this is a new world, I completely agree. This is just a new part of history. This would have been inconceivable not that long ago at all.
Sorry, Katy.
And I think two things have happened. Of course, now in the second term, there is a war in Ukraine, which means that Donald Trump is having to make these key decisions. But also, secondly, Donald Trump has this time around learnt from what he sees as his mistakes the last time, which is he's brought in people who will actually listen to him, are similarly minded to him, and will do what he says broadly so far.
Well, within the bounds of reality.
Yeah.
Yes.
Whereas last time you had much more of a pushback because he went closer to traditional Republican picks in these roles, and it does mean that Donald Trump, I think, is able to action things that the first time around actually more through failure of incompetence, not being able to push things through, weren't happening.
Yeah, I mean, something I found sort of genuinely alarming, and again, it makes me feel sort of quite, I don't know, pathetic that I find it alarming, but that there seems to be almost zero pushback on the Republican side. You'd think there'd be Republicans, internationalist Republicans, traditional Republicans, Reagan Republicans, who'd go, hey, guys, you know what? If our allies are terrified about what we're doing and feel betrayed, maybe that's not entirely good. But it seems the more Europe complains, the more, as you say, because Trump is now surrounded by these people who support him in everything he does, the more they're like, hey, this must be working perfectly then.
Yeah, and of course, we are technically in what we would all describe as the honeymoon period, even though the issues on the table did not make it look like a honeymoon. And you can imagine there being more of a fracturing of support as things run on. But right now, I don't think anyone wants to be the first person, unless they're already a known Trump critic and are dealing with the consequence of that, to put their head above the parapet.
Yeah, I mean, having like Merz in Germany saying, the goal has to be strategic independence from the United States. It's just an astonishing thing for a German chancellor to be saying, right, James?
Yeah. And I think the point with the people around Trump is also that he looks a lot more like the future of American politics than he did in his first term. I think a lot of people were thinking, I've got to hang on to my reputation.
He's a blip. Yeah.
When he's gone, he's a blip, and I don't look like an idiot afterwards. A lot of people are now thinking, if I want to have a future in the Republican Party, if I myself want to be president one day, I've got to be on this side. And it's kind of scary because it's the way that self-interest snowballs in politics, and it just takes people to begin to send a change in the wind for things to really snowball in one direction, and the incentive for standing up to it just totally goes. And I think where probably a lot of Americans don't quite grasp how horrified everyone in Europe is just because it's so far away. And I think when you see Americans talking about it, it's just, it's like for us if something was happening on the other side of Eurasia, it's just a different place. And if you choose to ignore it and not think about it, and kind of can.
I remember having a conversation with an American cousin last summer who was going to vote for Trump, and I was saying, "What's you guys in Europe make such a fuss? What's your problem?" And I was like, "Well, it's like sort of existentially frightening for us because our security depends on you." And he was like, "Oh, I literally hadn't thought about that, and I don't think it's very important." I was like, "Well, there you go.